1. Just a little background on me. My work requires accurate time stamping of events, so in my day-to-day existence, anytime something out of the ordinary occurs, I make a note of the time and document the occurrence as soon as possible. In this instance, I made note of the time as it occurred and documented the occurrences immediately following, since memories degrade and I wanted to be sure of what happened. I apologize, this is a bit lengthy, but I assure you it's weird. If you or anyone you know can make sense of it, please comment or DM me. On Saturday morning at 2:21 a.m., March 12, 2011, while traveling northbound on Interstate 2059, my friend A and I came upon an accident immediately after Meridian MS. The accident scene was approximately 1/4 to 1 mile maximum outside the Meridian MS city limits, in the outskirts spanning both northbound and southbound lanes, as well as the grassy median where the wreckage was. There were flare-type lights and a flashing sign in the road stating possible delay accident ahead. Immediately to the left of my car, there was a man's body on the left shoulder of the northbound side of the I-2059. He was face down in the road, with his right arm extended above his head. In what looked like a Superman pose, he was obviously dead, wearing a plaid or flannel yellow, black and red shirt. By the looks of it, he had been ejected from the vehicle. I drove very slowly to avoid hitting any of the accident victims or debris. It was late, so we took the accident as a wake-up call, and to avoid being victims ourselves by hitting a deer or something. We decided to go back to the Meridian and check into a hotel rather than driving 40 miles to the nearest town. We took a turnaround, and were now in the southwest-bound lane, catching the flip-side view of the accident scene. The wreckage, a silver or gold pickup truck, was on the grass in the Meridian, with a giant hole in the windshield. Another dead man halfway through the window and blood and chunks all over the windows and windshield. The only other vehicles there were a fire truck, and what looked like a truck with a winch, a tow truck. We both saw the accident scene, the wrecked vehicle, the fire truck, the wrecker truck, the dead bodies, and the lone fireman directing southbound traffic. We assumed the accident was a recent one. The bodies were still visible and not covered. There were no police officers or police cars on the scene, and the ambulance and coroner were not there either. And there was only one firefighter directing traffic. With the fireman on my left waving a blue light, flashlight, I drove very slowly, almost coming to a halt. I don't know why, maybe it was the shock of the accident scene, but I wanted to say something to the fireman. He was alone, and I was pretty much stopped dead in my tracks in the whole road, with him at my window. I looked at him and opened my mouth as if I were going to say something. He looked at me and I just gasped. I didn't say a thing or even lower my window. It was then that my friend realized we were stopped and told me to move along so we can get out of this scene and into the Super 8 that was just up the road on the right. We pulled in the Super 8 parking lot, talked for about a minute or two max, and decided we didn't want to stay so close to the accident. Despite the time, we were both completely awake from the shock of it all. Although we would have to drive through the scene once again, we weren't going to rubberneck. We pressed on up the road we came from, I-2059. When we got back to the part of the highway where the accident was, a quarter mile or so, there was nothing. Absolutely nothing. No accident, no flashing lights, no bodies, no fire truck, no firemen, etc. I'm certain it was the same road, though. The same tar streaks in the cracks, and a Dell server box were off to the side. The server box appeared to be unrelated to the highway crash. It was odd since we only spent about 2 minutes in the Super 8 parking lot. Didn't even get out of the car and had just driven through the accident scene no more than 5 minutes before this point. Upon realizing the accident scene was no longer there, we presumed a logical explanation. Perhaps we had incorrectly taken the wrong path. So we drove down 2 additional nearby roads, highways, for clarification, assuming the accident was on one of the other roads. When neither attempt produced an accident scene, we returned to the I-2059, drove several miles up the road, northbound, and back to Meridian southbound. The drive was for clarification that the accident scene wasn't further ahead than what we recalled. It was not there. Upon arriving in Meridian again, we stopped at yet another random hotel parking lot much further in town to put the pieces together. While at the random hotel parking lot, I received a text message, the timestamp on it, as well as the current time on my phone, car, and watch all read 2:20 a.m. It was very bizarre. The entire incident, to include driving back and forth up various roads and back into town, took about 20 or 30 minutes. And the time should have been approximately 2:41 to 2:51 a.m., not 2:20 a.m., a minute before we saw the accident scene. We were in awe, left Meridian and stopped in York, Alabama for the night. After our stay over brunch, we called around and fished for information of an actual accident. We have confirmation from the fire departments, police department, and state highway department that the accident did not occur. The only accident that occurred along that route was not at that location, did not involve a pickup truck, and injuries were not sustained. It was an entirely unrelated accident at a different time. We proceeded to our destination. In addition to checking the Meridian news and forums on a daily basis, I called all of them back on several days. Later that day, on Saturday afternoon, as well as on the following Monday, March 14th, 2011. Unable to shake the curiosity off, my friend and I googled and found a link detailing someone else's account of a similar occurrence. A phantom accident isn't a big deal, but other factors make this hard to understand. The time, during the entire duration of the incident, experience, etc., was 2:21 to 2:22 a.m., so according to the clocks, approximately 1 minute lapsed during the 20 or 30 actual minutes we took during the following. The part I have a hard time understanding is the time. How and why was the current time 1 minute prior to when we drove through the accident scene at 2:20 to 2:21 a.m.? At that point, we did not drive through a time change from Central to Eastern Time. Daylight savings time adjustments were not to occur until the following evening, and our clocks had not been adjusted as of yet. Occam's razor would chalk up to the time difference being human error, and we did not experience a lapse in time. That is very understandable, except I made a note of the time, as I always do. With certainty, I know that it was not a residual haunting. There was interaction with the firemen, in addition to a time lapse. After mulling it over, a few details struck me as odd. Why was there only one fireman? How did a single fireman drive both a fire truck and a tow truck? Also, do firemen ever travel alone in the fire truck? Another thing to note is the fire department told us that they don't have bluish or white flashlights. At the time, their flashlights were tungsten and gave off an orange or yellow light. Glitch in the Matrix. 2. Sometimes the Matrix shows us that our reality is more malleable, fractal and lucid than we could ever have possibly imagined. Spring 2015. The large glass window separating the garden from my bedroom magnified the sun's rays across my bed. I was laying down contemplating my life's choices, twisting some herbal vitamins into an aesthetically pleasing cone. It was my 30th birthday. I had awoken at a casual 3 p.m. A knock on my bedroom door. It was my aunt. 2 of my aunts live with us. She greeted me with a smile and a yellow envelope sealed with a red piece of string at the top. The string was twisted in a circle around an ornamental button. It was a gift envelope. I was well accustomed to these, as usually on my birthday my aunt will give me an envelope with some cash in it. I assumed that's what this was. It could have been something else, but its size and weight indicated to me that it was cash. I thanked her and explained that I would join the rest of the family shortly to cut the cake and spend some time together. I flicked the envelope on my desk and hopped in the shower. Around 30 minutes later, I got ready to go meet my family. I decided to put the envelope in a safe before I left my room. I looked on my desk where I had left it, but it was nowhere to be seen. I just figured I had placed it elsewhere and spent around 15 minutes searching my room to no avail. It had vanished. I could not find the bloody thing anywhere. obviously confused, I decided to go tell my aunt that I had lost her gift. This is where things got strange. I went to my aunt's room and told her that I had lost the envelope she gave me. She looked at me confused and said, "What envelope do you mean?" I quickly responded, "The one you gave me like an hour ago." She then said a few words that made me freeze in position like a disobedient soldier being reprimanded by his commanding officer. "I didn't give you any envelope or your card yet." "Wait, what?" I was a little perturbed by her response and asked her again, assuming she misunderstood me. She is not one to play random jokes on people, so that would have been too far out of character. I further clarified. The yellow decorative envelope with a piece of red string wound around the top sealing it. She confirmed she had come to my room to wish me a happy birthday but hadn't given me anything yet. She then told me that she hadn't bought the envelope or the card yet, and was actually about to leave for the mall with my younger sister to get some things. Immediately I got this sinking feeling in my stomach like you get before a big exam during school. This was combined with the destabilizing and confusing sensation that a déjà vu can induce. However, this was more of a premonition, or perhaps she gave me an envelope in an alternate reality into which I caught a 2-minute glimpse. I was sure she had given me an envelope. When she greeted me an hour ago, I was stumped. I said bye to her and stumbled back to my room. Obviously, the first thing I did was try to go through all the scenarios in which this dilemma made any sense. It didn't. No matter which way I approached it, I vividly remember her handing me that envelope. Now, I'm not sure if the next development was the power of suggestion, or what, but she returns later and we all have dinner. She then gives me my envelope and card. My jaw almost hit the floor. It was the exact same one she had brought me earlier. Same dulling yellow color with bright red string coiled around the seal. I just said thanks as I didn't want to burden her with this anomaly, and returned to my bedroom to ponder what had happened. A few days passed, where I thought about it regularly, and then, over time, I just moved it to the back of my head where I shelved it away to investigate at some point in the future. To this day I am unsure of what happened, and these glitches have occurred at sporadic moments throughout my life. I truly believe that it was some form of glitch or splicing together, temporarily, of timelines. The fractal nature of our reality provided me some clues. The system environment matrix we are part of is starting to become fragmented. There is something very peculiar occurring in the world today with regards to awareness and how we can influence the code. Thanks for reading. 3. This happened to me about 4 years ago during my freshman year of college at a small liberal arts school in rural Vermont. It was winter in Vermont and snow was glinting all around me. I was in a contemplative and brooding kind of mood, and so I did what I always do when contemplative, brooding, bored, or otherwise not engaged in any other activity. I went for a walk. I've always gone for long walks and am an avid hiker. On this day, I headed out to a wide footpath known locally as the Rail Trail. As the name implies, it was formerly a railway during the town's brief time as a significant slate exporter. The rail stretches 8 miles through farmland and ends at an Amtrak station 1 town over. At this point in time, I had never walked the entire length of the trail. About 3 to 4 miles in, one comes to a small wooden bridge, and just beyond that, another. I had only ever walked as far as the second bridge. On this day I trudged through the snow that was piled a foot or 2 high, until I reached the first bridge. Upon reaching the bridge, I leaned to my right and scribbled a few words and shapes into the snow that was piled on top of the bridge's railing. Let me make this perfectly clear. In the direction I had headed out, I wrote some words and shapes on the railing to my right. I then continued on my way. Before getting to the second bridge, I decided that I ought to turn around and go home. I was feeling less contemplative, and I knew there was an assignment that I ought to be working on. So I turned on my heel and headed back the way I came. I quickly came back to the bridge that I had only recently left, and began walking across it. However, something to my right caught my eye. There on the railing to my right, as I was headed back the way I came, were the words and shapes I had scribbled into the railing. I was confused and dashed over to the railing on my left, where they ought to be, and it was pristine, untouched. I shook my head and puzzled over it as I continued walking back home. Shortly after continuing, however, I came upon another bridge. I started to feel pretty uncomfortable. I had never passed the second bridge, so there should only be one bridge to cross on the way back. Feeling thoroughly unsettled, I picked up the pace. Something was not right. After about 15 minutes more of brisk walking, everything began looking incredibly unfamiliar. The sides of the trail were turning into hills and forests that I had never seen. 15 minutes after that, I knew that somehow I was walking in the direction I had originally set off in. I turned for the second time, and almost broke into a run. This time I came to the second bridge, then the first. When I arrived at the first, there on my left were the woods and shapes, just as they ought to have been the first time I turned around to walk home. I don't know what this all amounts to, but it sure felt as though I had stepped into a rip in the fabric of space-time. I very clearly remember passing the bridge, then turning and heading home. How I happened to end up heading the wrong direction and being a half-mile away from where I remember turning, I cannot say. 4. I was driving my grandmother home from Nebraska. I think we were traveling south on Highway 45. Everything was normal, we were just cruising along. There were no side roads and no gradual splits. We were just driving straight down Highway 45. All of a sudden, we found ourselves in this small little town. The road didn't veer off and no turns were made. All of a sudden, we started noticing strange things. Wide open hilly land turned instantly to thick woods that you couldn't see through. The trees started getting closer and closer to the highway, until they were almost brushing the driver's side mirror. The thick wooded area started giving way to buildings. Looking around, my grandma and I found ourselves in a little town. It was just a main street that led to the end of the town, which held a strange large grey-black church or town hall type building. There were very few cars, and the cars that were there were odd. One of them I remembered. It looked like a mix between 50s and 80s construction. The town itself was just so strange. The second we pulled into this little town, my grandma starts getting extremely uneasy. I knew something was up. The town was just wrong. It's hard to describe. At first glance, it looked like any other small town. It's when you started examining things more closely that the wrongness of this place became apparent. The resulting effect was just creepy beyond words. I think it's called the uncanny valley, when something looks a little too lifelike, but not lifelike enough, and you're left with just a very creepy sensation. That is how this impersonation of a town left us feeling. It's hard to describe the strangeness of this place. Okay, imagine that somebody took a very skilled artist who has never seen what a small town in America looks like. The artist is given a detailed and highly stylized description of small town, Main Street, USA. He then paints an extremely detailed portrait of what he believes a small town in America looks like. The resulting painting would be very odd at best, or downright terrifying at worst. That's the best way I can describe this town. A deceptively realistic representation of a small town. A strange place designed off somewhat flawed information, with no first-hand knowledge to aid in the detail. The end result is a place that looks normal, but upon closer inspection, is the stuff of nightmares. Everything about the place just seemed off, especially when you take into account the fact that we never made any turns. One moment we were headed south down Highway 45, the next the forest was either side of us, thickens to the point where you couldn't see anything through it. The forest growing so close to the highway that you could reach out your window and touch them. The forest then thins out and opens up. Out of absolutely nowhere, a little town pops up. We're slowing down into the small little Main Street town. At this point I'm thinking, wow, this is really strange. My grandma, on the other hand, is already in the we should be anywhere else on the planet except for right here stage. I didn't see any people at all there. In hindsight, that's probably a good thing. The big building at the end of the street, the building that looked like it was the most important building in town. It had grey walls and a black roof, with, I think, 4 towers. Maybe more. If the town looked somewhat ominous, then that building looks downright diabolical. I was becoming very apprehensive the more I thought about our situation. I knew something extremely strange was happening. Highway 45 doesn't just dead-end into a town that's not on any maps. Like I said, there were no gradual turn-offs, and we definitely did not make any turns. Getting back to the way the place looked, it was like a dream. At first glance, if you were just driving by, everything might appear to be normal. You stop to look for a moment, and you see so many irregularities, windows in wrong places, storefronts with no doors and no signs. There were no other streets turning in or out. It seriously looked like just the description of a small town. It was missing so many details. On the way into it, the woods got immensely thick. The trees were growing all the way up to the highway. There was no shoulder a tree could have taken my mirror, just by getting close to the edge. Sorry, I know I mentioned the forest before, it was just so strange. Tension was growing in the car, about halfway to the building at the end of the street. I slowed the car down to a crawl. My grandma in the seat next to me was absolutely freaking out at this point. To her credit, she was doing it relatively silently. Just terrified and shaking, saying, "We need to leave, we need to leave." I guess I am very lucky that my grandma was with me. If I had been alone in that place, curiosity would have absolutely gotten the better of me, and I would have definitely gotten out to explore. I felt like we were in a place that we were not supposed to be, a place that we weren't supposed to know about, that human eyes were not meant to see. It was like this mask was put over whatever was really there, just in case any uninvited guests showed up. All they would see was this strange small town. I don't know how we ended up there, a place where people aren't supposed to be. If I'm right, and what we saw was just masking something, then how terrifying would the truth have been? So thank you, Grandma, you probably saved my life. Because I would absolutely had to have explored that place. I did a 2-point turn. If you don't know what that is, it's when you pull close to the right side of the road, you put your car in reverse and turn your wheel all the way to the left. You hit the gas, and your car spins around backwards. You hit the brakes right before you go off the road on the other side. Drop it into drive, turn your wheel back to the right, and hit the gas. 2 points, reverse, then forward. We start going back up the street that we'd come down, and I honestly didn't even know how this would work. I had no idea how the nature of this place worked. I was half afraid that we would be stuck there. But soon the strange, odd-looking buildings gave way to the thick forest, the forest that was almost touching the highway. After driving through this for a while, the trees started clearing out a bit. We drove until the highway went back to normal, with the trees far off of the highway, and the forest not so unbelievably dense. I continued driving north until I saw the sign that said I was going north on Highway 45. I made a U-turn and started heading back south down Highway 45. All the way through there were no turn-offs, there were no merge lanes, there were no slight turns that I might have mistaken for the main highway. Once driving south on Highway 45 again, nothing else weird happened. Besides not seeing any turn-offs and never coming across any unnervingly dense woods. Grandma was shaking. She and I both knew something out of this world had just happened. I don't know what town we ended up in. I do know there's no such town in Mississippi, I checked. So this is one of my bigger glitch stories. I would absolutely love to know if anything like this has happened to anyone else out there. And once again, thank you, Grandma. 5. About 2 years ago, I started a new job at a startup marketing company. We didn't have a true office at the time. So we all met up at the owner's house Monday through Friday. His house was built very close to a lake and far away from the heart of the nearest town. I absolutely loved the commute each day, no highways, no expressways. After a few months, I had explored the majority of streets in the area after work. It was beautiful. No longer did I need a GPS to get there, and had a complete mental map of the surroundings. The drive home was the easiest part. Get in the car, take an immediate left, continue down the neighborhood road until met with a 2-lane farm to market. Then take a right and continue for a mile until met with the stop sign. There were a few more steps after the stop sign, but they aren't pertinent. Now, the little 2-lane farm to market road is a bit hilly and had ups and downs. In fact, even though you're only a straight mile away from the stop sign, you cannot see it at all. A hill blocks the view of the stop sign until you drive over it. So here is where things get weird. Normal day, I leave the owner's house at 6:30 p.m. I get in my car, take the immediate left turn right onto the farm to market road. I come up to the stop sign and see it clear as day, make a complete stop, look down at my dash, make sure my blinker is still on, look back up and bam! I am nowhere near the stop sign. In fact, I'm stopped in the middle of the road, almost 3/4 of a mile away from the stop sign. Heck, the hill was still blocking the view of the stop sign. I immediately pulled over to the grass on the side of the FM road to figure out what the hell just happened. My first instinct was that I'd had a stroke, or perhaps a frontal partial seizure, although both were unlikely as I was 22 at the time and did not have a history of seizures. I mentally recalled the last 60 seconds. I vividly saw the stop sign. I even remember the part of the song over the radio that was playing when I reached the stop sign. I was absolutely speechless. After a few minutes of catching my breath, I continued to drive home. To this day, I cannot explain what happened. I'm not sure if it was some sort of time loss, or some sort of teleportation. I'm not sure what to believe. I've had a few other strange incidences of time loss and teleportation that have happened since. Even one that was confirmed and observed by 15+ people. That still can't explain how I got from A to B, because they were all there. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Glitch in the Matrix Stories, episode 49. Big thanks to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Okay, I'm going to cut this outro super short. I just want to thank everybody. So, until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.